Hello, everyone. Hello. Okay. Sorry. So I'm trying a slightly different way of recording this today using YouTube Live. So, yes, basically every single episode has had a slightly different technical issue associated with it. So, why not? January 1st, 2019. Um, this is Everyday Truth, where I share the ordinary truth in my heart out loud. And it's been a really good practice for me to just tune into what that is each day and to give voice to it and have the words move through my mouth and in my breath. And you can see that it's nighttime now. Well, it's just after sunset, January 1st. And today, what's in my heart is I'm wondering this. Last night, I watched the movie Mommy Dearest for the first time all the way through. When I was about, hmm, 8 to 10 years old, my brother showed me a clip of it. I think he was watching it and then he said, "Oh, hey, come watch this." But he only wanted to show me this little part of it. And it was the scene with the wire hangers where the Joan Crawford character comes into her daughter's room in the middle of the night and freaks out because she sees a wire hanger and she has made a strict rule in her house that there would be no wire hangers. And so she just goes on this rage of like tearing everything out of the closets, throwing them on the ground, and like taking the hanger and making her daughter confront the fact that she used this wire hanger and like starts beating her with it. And then she proceeds to go into the bathroom and say, was this, do you consider this clean? Did you scrub the floor today? And the kid is like 6 or maybe 8 years old at the most. But so she ends up like dumping all this scouring powder all over the floor and like getting down on her knees and making her daughter start scrubbing it in the middle of the night. And then there's this great moment where the little brother, who's like locked into his bed with a harness, comes out after the mom is done raging and leaves the room. The brother comes and says, "Oh, I'll help you." And the older sister says, "No, go back to bed. She'll kill me if she finds out that you helped me." And there were several scenes that just like caused the hairs on my arms to raise and like serious flashbacks to happen for me. And here's what I'm wondering, because I, of course, went and read about Christina Crawford and the story of how she wrote this book and decided to, put it into the world, and what is she doing now, and the story of the movie. And what's interesting is that at the time, the movie came out in 1979, or the book came out in 1979. The movie came out in 1981 or so. And so basically in America at that time, there was no public discussion of child abuse and family violence that was going on. Everyone thought it was an urban or low economic status problem, and that certainly it wasn't happening among famous, rich, beautiful people in Hollywood. And so that was groundbreaking about this book, that the daughter wrote her memoir revealing these things about her childhood that um, obviously struck a chord. It actually did very well in the box office, much better than the critics reviewed it to be. So here's my question. It reminds me of the Tiger Mother book, which is a book written by a mother. And to read the comments, the public comments, when anyone has written about this subject since 2011, any child, adult child of that kind of parenting is absolutely outraged that a mother is getting airtime for her version of the story and her self-glorifying, tongue-in-cheek descriptions of her damaging behavior, or at least irresponsible behavior, because of the fact that she's not apologetic at all about what she has done. And I'm not talking about the not allowing sleepovers and the rules and stuff. I'm actually talking about the rages that involve destroying property, throwing things, and just scaring children and locking them out and locking her child out on the porch as a way to make some kind of a point when they're like under the age of 5. And apparently, I found an article that was written just in 2018 in the South China Morning Post, which is a Hong Kong international newspaper. And it was written by one of the senior editors, and it was sort of her outrage piece about just the parenting that she sees on the streets in Hong Kong. Totally outsized punishments, disproportionate to the level of the crime committed by the child. And, she talks about the number of times that she was locked out of her house as a child as punishment. And she's calling for change. She's calling for parents to really look at themselves and say, when are we going to stop acting like this? And so when a child writes a memoir detailing the terror and the abuse of their experience, why is it that typically our response, and here I'm talking about anything other than sexual abuse, because now we've gotten to a point in our society, thankfully, where basically once sexual abuse is made public, it's not tolerated. If it's obviously like covered up by a lot of institutions, i.e., the Catholic Church, among others. But once it is surfaced as a news item or as a personal account, once those people come forward, 100% of the time, we're not trying to interview the perpetrator and see if it was really their whole personality, or whether we're missing an important side of their character that hasn't been mentioned. We just say that's a perpetrator, that's a sexual abuser. They get put on a list and they're basically ostracized for the rest of their lives. However, with other kinds of invisible abuse, including physical, emotional, and verbal, whenever survivors of that type of abuse come forward, almost 100%, and I'm talking about, I guess, people that either are in denial or have just refused to believe that it's possible that a parent could verbally abuse their child. The response is always like, oh, I don't think that that's a fair representation of that person, the perpetrator. There must be a fuller human picture there that we need to understand. And so, in other words, we don't believe the child. We want the portrayal to be softened, and we want the children to take a step back in their outrage and be more understanding of the very people who refuse to take responsibility for or understand or even attempt to understand their own behavior. That it all becomes the responsibility of the child in that situation to be the understanding and compassionate one. And this is what Alice Miller is talking about in her books. In yesterday's Facebook Live, I talked about this book, A Drama of the Gifted Child. It's one among several books that Alice Miller has written about this phenomenon of total blindness and denial that we individually and as a society have gone into to protect our own psyche from the truth that there's rampant abuse in every childhood, some more severe than others, but this is not about comparing. It's about acknowledging the existence of it. And I'm slowly starting to understand and uncover for myself the importance of facing this and acknowledging and not staying in the common defense mechanisms that the vast majority of the world's population uses to get by on a day-to-day basis, which is humor, deflection, numbing, and denial. So I know now that whenever I speak from my strength, about my experience as a child and the various experiences of pain that I had as a result of the pain that the adults in my life were in, people get uncomfortable. People always want to try to understand the adults in that situation. They don't actually empathize with me. What that tells me, what it used to tell me is there's something wrong with me. What I used to make this mean is that there's something wrong with me and I need to get over it. What I now know is that this is how little people are in touch with their own feelings, and how the codependency of trying to rush to fix other people is so ingrained that they cannot hear someone else's experience of pain without doing that same thing, rushing to help the other person. And I am really getting to the point where it's getting tiresome. And I don't need to stay around for really long conversations with people around this anymore when they're trying to get me to understand the abuser's behavior more than just being with the impact and my processing and growing from acknowledging what I experienced from an abuser. Because basically, the abuse is that for a whole lifetime, from childhood through whatever year of your life it is, when you stop waiting for your abuser to apologize. And for those of you who are still in that, who are still waiting for the idealized relationship with your abuser to finally happen, I am just, I can identify with the pain of that and the disappointment of that. And then the subsequent carrying of all of the shame for your own feelings, that your own pain isn't valid, that your own confusion isn't valid, that your own anger isn't valid. All of these things come up because when all of those are part of coming to terms with having been on the receiving end of behavior that completely had no consideration for what your response and feelings were. So that was the initial abuse, is having absolutely no awareness of your feelings and the impact. And then the ongoing abuse is when you actually become aware of your feelings and try to confront that person, that they're denied again, that your feelings are denied again. And the cycle of incredible frustration around that is amazing, as long as you keep waiting for something that's not going to happen to one day happen. And again, whole lives are spent in that holding pattern of waiting, and in the holding pattern of deeply held shame around your own feelings and experience that cannot help but leak out into your environment. So that's where this practice comes from for me, which I learned. Let me emphasize that I have not found it to be effective to only use this solitary method of, or talking into a camera, into the internet, to voice my truth. I've had to be in rooms of support of real human beings to feel the warmth of a human being and the presence of a human body and a mind and an experience and a story being told, to be in the same room and to be held in that feeling of connection together, finding those stories that will heal us and finding some consistent process where that happens, I've found to be so essential. And I am, playing with ways, tweaking different technologies about how that might be done in a virtual space, because I know that the people I'm talking to are spread around the world and are often isolated in this pursuit of finding ourselves through different alternative lifestyles that we're exploring. So I know that that's the community I'm building toward in a virtual space, but I will tell you that the community is so essential because the trauma that I'm talking about of having a family member and one that you revered as a godlike person in your life, a parent, to have the damage come from that same person that you're trying to love and be loved by is a relational trauma. And there's a lot of neurobiology around that. And that's why we keep hoping that it will be different. And it's the child in us that keeps hoping that will be different. So growing up, reparenting ourselves into our own adulthood is about letting that other adult be who they are and on their path and not waiting on them for us to change ourselves. So that healing, since the healing occurred in a relationship with a person, I believe that the healing happened. Did I say, what did I say? Because the damage happened in a relationship, the healing also happens in relationship. Not only with others, but with this new relationship that we can cultivate inside ourselves. And this is all coming from experience that I have had myself, and is really exciting because, like I was saying yesterday, there's two halves of this equation. There's the inspiration and the affirmations and the replacement of old scripts with new um, possibilities. And then there is looking back and with eyes open and awareness and feeling about what actually moved through us and what we made things mean at the time when we were very, very, very small. And to bring those together is wholeness. And that's why I use that word wholeness. That is not just about memorizing a list of affirmations and repeating them over and over again and expecting that to work permanently and that we can just bury the past and forget it forever. It's not my experience, but I tried that for almost a decade. Um, but it's about somehow bringing our whole story together from the point of view of this new adult that we're becoming, the new observer, the one who isn't afraid of her own experiences and no longer needs to carry shame for what other people actually gave and did to her. And to really, this reminds me of one of the most damaging statements that actually stuck with me from the self-help world, which was intended to help. And it was like anytime someone said, "Oh, this happened to me," it was this police-like response that we would go in and say, "You mean it happened for you?" And there's a lot of this kind of language policing that happens in the coaching world. That's all well-intentioned, trying to, enforce these new ways of speaking. And if someone has been stuck in victim storytelling for many years, it's great. I had actually not told my story ever. And so coaching actually just put another layer of veneer over my real story that gave me another 8 years to not say anything. Um, so I'm not trying to discredit coaching. I'm just observing that it really, really depends on where a person is. So we do need to let go of victim stories, but there's also a very, very important step when we have been told to keep someone else's secret for them, their own shame. When an adult tells a child, "Don't tell anyone. This is our secret," That is the moment of transmission of shame from the adult for the behavior they're about to commit or just committed to the child, who is in a position of total powerlessness and obedience and has no choice in that moment other than a life threatening choice to break that secret with that person. So, when a person grows up to be an adult and is still holding on to those secrets for other adults in their lives that they've held since they were children, it's really important as a healing step to actually break the secret. That at the moment that that person's opens their mouth and discloses that secret that was given to them by an adult to hold on to, that person is taking one step towards releasing the shame that was passed on to them in the moment they were told to keep the secret. And it's very, very, very important to find the right kind of witness to receive that secret when it's told for the first time. Everything in the neurological system of the body of that person will resist speaking that. But in the right environment of connection, the soul knows it can open up. It can risk, it can take a risk. It's never guaranteed. But the moment of the choice point is now the time I'll take the risk. And when we want to change and create new possibilities in our life, it is always about facing that choice point of risk and deciding to say yes to a risk. There's no life without risk. And when we've been terrorized as children and frozen in someone else's fear, we can find ourselves as adults having these unrealistic expectations of a life with risk, and then we wake up and realize we haven't lived because we've denied ourselves all possibility of risk. Or the opposite, that we've taken all risks without regard and reverence for our life, and that's a different reaction to a trauma. So I continue to be really, really fascinated by trauma and the transmission of trauma from traumatized people to their children or students. In the case of if they're teachers or clergy or people in places of power. And it's it's like, and I'll just say this, that when I spent my 3 or 4 years doing art and doing polite art, that I mean, it kind of evolved into that. I did my personal art that no one understood, but it was extremely cathartic for me. It was these journal pages with just messy paintings that made no logical sense, but they were extremely satisfying for me. And then I started to want to just fill my life with more art. And so I was doing illustration and trying to find a way to make a living doing it. So I started to do these very pleasing nature scenes. And it was it was a pull. I got the praise and the likes from people because my art made people feel more comfortable. And I showed, comforting images of beauty that were indisputable, very, very neutral emotionally. Um, the beach and the forest and things, calming. But there was a pull inside of me to do the art that only I could do, which is to tell the story of my life that only I lived and only I saw in the way that I see. And it didn't fit into the boxes of comforting, not in a direct way, because the stories were about being scared and confused and in pain and having anger and conflicting feelings and searching. But I realize is that there's a whole other world and audience of people who are very, very, very interested and hungry for those kinds of stories. And that includes me because having been somebody who held my story inside for so long, every time I see a story like Mommy Dearest, like many other memoirs of these amazing journeys of growing out of the powerlessness of shame and abuse. Um, they're so inspiring. It's like food for me to know that, yes, there's another human out there in the world who found a way to tell the story and put it on paper and make it real. Somehow having it on paper or having it, spoken or shown in some way as a performance or a movie or play makes it real for someone else. And now I can say as the creator of one of those performances, having done my performance, what I experienced in the creating of that is I became a new person. I became someone who could claim my own experience. It's mine. Guess what? This is my show. If you want to talk about what you experience, you make your show. Thank you. I was very used to being interrupted in the middle of my stories to say, no, it wasn't that way. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that way. But in my show, those 40 minutes were mine on the stage, and no one could take them away from me. So important. And I also, with regard to some of the most traumatic moments at that time, you know, I told one of those stories that's in my show for the very first time in April of 2018. And I told it maybe 3 or 4 more times between then and when I actually did it in my show. And I really experienced that change of the more I told it, the stronger I became in being able to tell it as the adult me, not as my mother or as my 3-year-old self or as my 10-year-old protective brother or as my frozen father in that situation. None of those were me, not even the 3-year-old me that was like trying to make sense of it all. I became an adult, the one who could observe all of this, get inside that and tell the story and come back out much more smoothly than the very, very first time I told it, which really pulled me in. And I was held by this room of incredible connection that just allowed me to feel what I was feeling and not have to fix me and not have to feel sorry for me and not have to change anything, but just to be there and to say yes. And then have the next story come out and have that be, you know, as powerful in its own way. So, polite art to art that makes some people feel uncomfortable because they don't want to see certain aspects of life. They've chosen to live in their own version of reality, or they didn't have this experience and they don't have a curiosity about other people's suffering. Um, it usually gets transferred into, you know, other parts of their lives that they want to deny. It's great. And because that's most of the polite social world that we see, I really adapted my whole persona to fitting that. And now I'm taking the steps to go another layer deeper into my true authentic self and finding the community on this planet who shares this desire to become whole in expressing um, human experience. That it's all of these things. It's inspiring and it's harrowing and it's frightening and confusing and awe inspiring and wonderful and hard. And also that when we can find a way to own all of it, there's nothing wrong with any of it. So, as they say on January 1st, Happy New Year, and thank you for listening.